Click like and subscribe to keep up with new content.
So as we talk about the U.S. Constitution and the amendments of the U.S. Constitution, well, of course, there's the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. But when we get past that, we get into all sorts of other amendments, including the Reconstruction Amendments. The Reconstruction Amendments are the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. They're called the Reconstruction Amendments because they were created and ratified during the period of Reconstruction toward the end of and after the Civil War. So you don't need to know the exact years, but you should know that these come at the end of the Civil War. So they were ratified 1865 to 1870. The Civil War ended in 1865. So this is immediately after the Civil War, and the Reconstruction Amendments are a result of the Civil War. The Reconstruction period was 1863 to 1877, and the Reconstruction Amendments were ratified during that time period. So first, we're going to look at the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment says that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So what the 13th Amendment did is it abolished slavery throughout the United States and our territories. Now, you might be familiar with the Emancipation Proclamation, Abraham Lincoln's order to free the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order under war powers of Abraham Lincoln, and it only applied to the succeeding states, the states that were part of the Confederacy. And it did not permanently abolish slavery. So the 13th Amendment was needed to constitutionally abolish slavery forever in the United States. And that's what it does. It says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States, with one exception, people who are duly convicted through due process of a crime. So obviously if they arrest you, charge you, convict you of a crime, and put you in prison, then in a sense you are enslaved. You are in prison, and you can be made to work in prison. So that is the exception. That's the 13th Amendment, though. It freed the slaves throughout the United States permanently. Then we get into the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So what the 14th Amendment does is it takes the newly freed slaves and makes them full citizens of the United States. It also applies all their rights and privileges to the states as well. We'll come back to that and explain that in just a moment. But right now, the 14th Amendment makes the former slaves who have been freed by the 13th Amendment, now they are full citizens because they were born in the United States. And so this leads to something called birthright citizenship in the United States. Anyone who's born in the United States is made a citizen of the United States because of the 14th Amendment. Then finally, the last of the Reconstruction Amendments is the 15th Amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So this takes the newly freed slaves, who are now citizens of the United States, and extends to them voting rights. Now the first part of it, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied. Seems pretty straightforward. But just to make sure, they went ahead and added that states and the national government could not take away that right even for race or for previous condition as an enslaved person. So they want to make very clear what this amendment is doing. The 15th Amendment is saying that the former slaves who have now been freed and now been made full citizens of the United States also have the full citizen right of voting. And the fact that they're black or the fact that they were formerly a slave is not a cause, not a justification, not a constitutional reason for denying them the right to vote. So that's the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. You need to know each one of those. Now here's a mnemonic device I used to remember these, and you can use this as well. If you have a different way to remember that, that's perfectly fine. But here's how I think about it. I just think logically, if I want to achieve these goals, what is the order I have to do the steps in? So 13th Amendment, frees those who are enslaved. That's the first step, okay? You want to free the slaves. Second step, the 14th Amendment makes those freed slaves citizens because they're free people. You have to free them from slavery before you can make them citizens. It makes no sense to give them citizenship while they're still enslaved, because then you have a condition where somebody's a citizen and supposedly has the rights of a citizen and yet is enslaved. So logically, you have to free them from slavery, and then you can make them full citizens. And once they're citizens, step 3, you can give them the right to vote. In the United States, you have to be a citizen in order to vote. So you can't give them the right to vote when they're not citizens. So citizenship has to come first. So there's a logical step to 13, 14, and 15, and if you just think about it, you can probably remember what each of them is. So on a test, I might ask you, what's the 14th Amendment? And if you're thinking, okay, the Reconstruction Amendments, you can work through the process and say, well, the first thing you have to do is free them, that's the 13th. Then you can make them citizens, that's the 14th. And that has to come before the 15th of giving voting rights. So that's my little mnemonic device or memory aid for remembering the Reconstruction Amendments. Now, we're going to talk about how they affect the Bill of Rights and a little bit more. But first we need to remember, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, originally only applied to the federal government. It did not apply to states. And that's because it begins with the words, Congress shall make no law. And it goes on, respecting an establishment of religion, etc. So the First Amendment, the first words of the Bill of Rights are that Congress shall make no law. So this restriction on government power, this limit on government power, applies only to congressional laws. It does not apply to state laws. This is really important, that the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states. For example, First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That prohibited the national government from Congress from creating a national church or a state-sponsored church at the national level. But well into the 1800s, there were individual states that still maintained state-sponsored churches. And that was okay under the US Constitution because the Bill of Rights did not apply to states. It only applied to the national government. States couldn't violate the Constitution, but in this case, it wasn't a violation of the Constitution because the Constitution only prohibited Congress from establishing a state church. But then we get into something called the Due Process Clause and eventually the Equal Protection Clause. The Due Process Clause is part of the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment, which is part of the Bill of Rights and therefore only applies to the national government, says, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property, those natural rights, without due process of law. Now remember, due process, due, D-U-E, is what you are owed, the process, the steps. As a citizen, you are owed a certain process before the government can take away your rights. If they want to put you in prison for a crime, they have to charge you with the crime, they have to give you a fair trial. If they want to take away your land to build a highway, they have to give you a fair price. If you don't think the price they're giving you is fair, you can go to court and argue that you are entitled to more money. There's a process before they can take away your life, liberty, or property. But this only applies to the national government. So the Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause that guarantees you due process only applies to the national government taking away your life, liberty, or property. But then the 14th Amendment has a Due Process Clause. It says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The 14th Amendment importantly says no state shall do this. So what the 14th Amendment does, it says that no state shall deprive you of your rights as a citizen of the United States. So all of those Bill of Rights protections now apply to the states. States cannot violate your First Amendment rights, but that's because of the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. And then also there's something called the Equal Protection Clause. The 14th Amendment goes on and says, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So what this means is that everybody has to be treated equally under the laws of the states and of the United States. People cannot be discriminated against. Now, This is another one of those things that seems pretty straightforward, but is not once you get into court cases. For example, many of you guys are about to turn 18 or maybe 18. If you're a male, you have to register for the draft, the military draft, the selective service. If you're a woman, you do not have to register for the draft. So in that case, the government is treating men and women differently. Some people might argue that that's discrimination and it's not fair. But the Supreme Court has said, in this case, it is allowed. And since the Supreme Court has allowed it, that's the interpreter of the Constitution, they've decided that that's allowed. So what equal protection means in every specific case is sometimes argued, but at least the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause states the principle that the government should treat all people equally under the law. So that is the Due Process Clause of the 5th and 14th Amendment and the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Now, all the Bill of Rights, your rights as citizens of the U.S., are also applied to states, and all people are to be treated equally by the government, all citizens. So, a couple of court cases just to illustrate this principle. Tinker v. Des Moines, 1969. In this case, there were some high school students who were wearing black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. Wearing a black armband is a traditional sign of mourning, that you were sad about something. They wanted to protest the Vietnam War, so they wore these black armbands to school. The school said that they were causing a disruption and couldn't do that, and they said it's our First Amendment right to express our views. The school suspended them and told them they couldn't come back to school as long as they were wearing the black armbands. They sued. They took it to court. Well, when they went to court, they claimed a violation of both their First and 14th Amendment rights. The First Amendment, right to free speech, free expression. The 14th Amendment is the one that takes that First Amendment right and applies it to the states. Without the 14th Amendment, the First Amendment says Congress shall not do something. It doesn't say a state school could not do that. So in order to say that the school was violating their rights, they had to say that the First Amendment was was being violated, and the 14th Amendment was being violated. So anytime somebody is claiming a local government or a state government is violating their rights, that's going to be a whatever amendment and the 14th Amendment violation. Another example of that is a case of Mapp v. Ohio. Mapp, last name of a woman whose home was illegally searched. Police searched her house and they didn't have a search warrant. They found some illegal things, they arrested her, put her on trial. She sued and went to court and claimed a violation of her Fourth Amendment rights and her 14th Amendment rights. The Fourth Amendment says that you cannot be searched without a warrant. But again, it's part of the Bill of Rights, so it only applies to the national government until you have the 14th Amendment. And now it applies to states as well. So she could claim that the local police violated her 4th and 14th Amendment rights when they searched her home illegally. So that's just illustration of how this 14th Amendment, due process and equal protection, takes the rights of United States citizens and applies them even at the state and local level. So these are the Reconstruction Amendments. When it comes to the test, the things you should be able to tell me. You should be able to tell me, why were they passed? They were passed as a result of the Civil War. They wanted to finally and totally, completely abolish slavery in the United States and to take the formerly enslaved people, make them full citizens of the United States, and also ensure that states did not deprive them of their rights. So that's why they were passed. What did each do? You should be able to tell me about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments individually. You should be able to tell me about the Due Process Clause of the 5th and 14th Amendments. You should be able to explain what due process means and what the Due Process Clause of the 5th Amendment means, and then what the 14th Amendment added to that. And then finally, what is the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment? Those are the things you should be able to do when it comes to the test, whether it's my test or the end of the year test from the state. You should be able to do those things when it comes to the Reconstruction Amendments.